Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Wonderful you could be with us for this State of the American Traveller webinar. This is our Destination Management Edition. We actually held it in 2019, November 2019. I don't know if you remember that, a lot's happened since then. And we shared with you how travellers are thinking about the issues of sustainability, the impact of tourism on their local communities, and a range of other issues connected with destination management. And we're delighted to bring it back to you in 2021. So my name's Chris Adams. I look after research and insights at Miles. And we're delighted to be joined by two wonderful presenters and very good friends and colleagues. So Kim Vince-Cruz is Vice President at Destination Analysts. She actually just presented last week, I think it was, Kim, the visitor guide research that we worked with you on with DMA West. Where are you joining us from, Kim?
Yes, absolutely, Chris. I am dialing in from San Francisco. So my former home of almost 15 years. I just recently moved back to Los Angeles, where I'm from originally, but in San Francisco now to see some of my work colleagues.
Very good. And another very familiar face and a very good friend and colleague. I was had the privilege of being in Copenhagen. Sina Jungersted is founder and chief executive of Group Now, joining us from Copenhagen. And no doubt you cycled home, as everybody does in Copenhagen.
I did, as everyone does, and as I do every day. I cycled home today, yes, in Copenhagen. Actually, today I cycled home from the new Democracy Garage, which is like a community experimental place that just came, that just started here in Copenhagen. So it was a different route, but on my bike nonetheless.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful city. I can recommend Copenhagen to anybody. So just a couple of resources before we jump into it. So all the research you're going to be hearing about today is available on both our site, our website, and Destination Analysts, and there is an interactive dashboard available. So please check out those. We will be emailing the slides, the webinar recording, and other resources in an email to everybody who is joining us today or registered. That will go out tomorrow, 24 hours after the webinar. So please be assured you'll be getting all of the information we're sharing. And we're going to be highlighting after the research a couple of really wonderful resources and projects. So we have collaborated again with our good friends at Group Now and Global Destination Sustainability Movement on a two-part white paper series called 26 for COP26. Of course, COP26, the big climate change conference in Glasgow, and these are 26 practical actions that you can be taking to tackle this issue, as well as, of course, deal with some of the other destination management issues. So more on that in a moment. And Sina is going to help us introduce a really exciting global project we're collaborating with Group Now and a number of other partners on. It's called Time for Democracy: How DMOs connect, engage, and seek the input of local residents to ensure that there is true democracy in terms of how tourism is being developed and managed in your community. So it's a really exciting project, and Sina will introduce what's going on in Europe, plus what our plans are for a North America and Oceania edition of that research. So we're going to jump right now with Kim into the latest traveller sentiment research on how US travellers are thinking about the issues around sustainability and destination management. Then we'll look at briefly at three quick examples of 26 for COP26, what communities are doing around the world to deal with sustainability. We'll look at the Democracy Project with Sina. And then we'll have time, hopefully, for Q&A. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Kim and join you momentarily after her presentation. Thanks again, Kim.
All right. Thank you so much, Chris. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. All right. Well, thank you again so much for having me, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to be here to present the latest insights from the State of the American Traveler Destination Management Edition. The State of the American Traveler is a quarterly tracking study that we have conducted since 2006 amongst a nationally representative sample of 2,000 Americans to explore how they think, feel, and behave when it comes to leisure travel. And so we'll start off with current traveler sentiment, how they feel about travel right now. Advanced a little fast there. In each edition of the State of the American Traveler, Americans are asked two questions. One, in the next 12 months, do you expect to travel more or less for leisure than you did in the most recent 12-month period? As well as in the next 12 months, do you expect to spend more or less for leisure travel? And right now, 45.4% anticipate that they will travel more for leisure in the next year compared to the most recent 12-month period. And a similar percentage, 45.6%, expect to spend more on leisure travel. Looking at the historic trend for expected leisure travel, at the onset of the coronavirus pandemic, expectations to travel more for leisure in the next 12 months was at an all-time low of 15.3%. Fortunately, this has increased over the past year, exceeding pre-pandemic levels of optimism. On to travel spending. We ask Americans to describe their leisure travel spending priorities for the next year. And over half, 56.9%, report that their leisure travel spending will be a priority for them in the next 12 months. And looking at this metric, historically, perhaps not surprisingly, travel as a budget priority drastically decreased when the pandemic began, but we're seeing this metric increase. Fingers crossed that it'll reach that high of 70.6% right before the pandemic in winter of 2020. Over a quarter of American travelers say that their household financial situation is better off than a year ago. However, this is down compared to summer of this year, when a third of Americans reported being better off financially. Looking forward, over a third of American travelers anticipate that they will be better off financially in the next 12 months. Though again, this has declined since summer of this year from 42.8% to now 36.1%. 36.4% of American travelers feel that now is a good time for them to spend money on taking leisure trips. But again, in line with the trend that we have been seeing, this has declined since this past summer. From our National Travel Sentiment Tracking Study that was launched in March of last year, the latest data shows that over 60% of Americans consider travel prices generally too high right now. And 38.4% report that high travel prices have actually deterred them from taking a trip in the past month. We ask about the different types of destinations that Americans visited in the past year. And we see on this chart that cities top the list, followed by small towns and beach destinations. And when we compare the destination types that were visited in the past 12 months, to the types of destinations that American travelers expect to visit in the next 12 months, there is a notable difference for a lot of these types of destinations. We see here that more people expect to visit beaches, parks, mountain destinations, theme parks, and desert destinations. At the top of this chart, we see that cities are pretty much the same, although pre-pandemic, we saw that there was a much higher expectation. 74% of Americans pre-pandemic planned to take a leisure trip to cities and urban areas in the next year. So we'll now move into the crux of the data that will support destination management. And what we'll cover is environmental concerns, followed by climate change and the impact of over-tourism. And we'll start with environmental concerns. The majority of travelers don't believe that people traveling for leisure has a negative impact on the environment. However, 23.9% do believe that traveling does have a negative impact. And there's definitely a generational difference. We see here that younger travelers are far more likely to be sensitive to the negative impact that travel might have on the environment. Compared to 2 years ago, in fall of 2019, there has been a notable jump from 16.9% to now 1 in 4 who feel that leisure travel has a negative impact on the environment. When it comes to environmental issues that were experienced while traveling, the biggest issue that people see while traveling is plastic waste that they personally have created. And this is followed by carbon emissions. But overall, when we look at this chart, we see that there's been a drop in environmental issues that have been experienced compared to 2019. And that could very well be due to the fact that people were traveling less during these COVID times compared to pre-COVID times. We asked how often Americans think about the environmental impact of their travel when they plan their leisure trips. And we see here that 1 in 10 say that they always think about it. 1 in 10 feel that considering the environment is top of mind. And when we look at those who usually or always think about the environmental impact when they travel, we see here millennials again appear to be much more concerned, while baby boomers express less concern. A moment ago, we saw that millennials were also the likeliest to feel that travel has a negative impact on the environment. So it's something to keep in mind here with these younger travelers. They tend to have a longer travel future ahead of them. So something worth considering. And over the past 2 years, there has been an increase in how often people consider the environment when they plan travel. Amongst those who do consider the environment when they travel, most typically they think about the plastic waste that they personally create, as well as carbon emissions. Again, these are the same top 2 environmental issues that were experienced while traveling in the past year. For this edition, the Destination Management edition of the State of the American Traveler, we included a question set around green programs at hotels. And the first question within this set was, before taking this survey, were you aware that many hotels now have green initiatives that reduce the environmental impact of a guest's stay? And we see here over half, 56%, were indeed aware of hotel green initiatives. And overall, about 2/3 of American travelers feel positively about hotel green programs, just slightly down from 2019. 42.9% report regularly participating in hotel green programs, and this is nearly identical to fall of 2019. I actually recently came back from vacation. I spent some time in Valle de Guadalupe, which is Mexico's wine country region. And I definitely participated in the hotel green program. Our room in the property where we stayed, the room was just slightly above a yurt. And while the property did offer housekeeping, it was by request only. And the property was very much encouraging of conserving water and electricity. But despite positivity around hotel green programs, as well as participation in these programs, it's not necessarily a leading factor in selecting a place to stay. We asked American travelers, what are the top 3 motivators when they select their accommodations for leisure travel? And we see here topping the list are location and price, cited by 60% of American leisure travelers. Meanwhile, only 6.4% reported that a hotel's green program is a factor in selecting a place to stay. Travelers were asked to rate their level of agreement with this statement here. I believe that people generally should not travel long distances via air as it's bad for the environment. And we see that 1 in 5 agree that people should not travel long distances because it's bad for the environment. And this is actually up 5 percentage points compared to fall of 2019. In a little bit, we'll be hearing from Sina and Chris on actions to tackle climate change, but first data on how Americans feel about climate change and travel. We asked Americans whether they believe human activity is responsible for climate change. And over 60% said yes. 61.7% said they believe that human activity is responsible. And when we look at this by generation, again, we see here younger travelers are likelier to feel that humans are responsible for climate change. Interestingly, the percent of those who feel that human activity is responsible for climate change has declined just slightly from 64.1% in 2019 to now 61.7%. In total, over 1/3, 36.8% of Americans had heard of carbon offsets for travel. And this has dramatically increased from 25% 2 years ago. 1/4 of Americans report having purchased a carbon offset for travel. And in line with the generational trend, millennials are the likeliest generation to have done so. Next, we'll look at how Americans feel about over-tourism and its impact on local communities. In a little bit, Chris and Sina will share information on global best practices to engage and work with local residents in managing a destination. When asked if they live in a community that is considered a popular tourism destination, almost half, 47.1%, said yes, that they do live in such a place. And this is up from 40.9% in 2019. And as more communities grow their tourism product and attract more visitors to their destinations, we want to know how that impacts local resident perception. And so we asked American travelers how much they agree with this statement: tourism in my community makes it a better place in which to live. And we see here that almost 40% agreed, and this is up 6 percentage points compared to 2019. As another sign of growing resident positivity towards tourism in local communities, over half of Americans agree that tourism is important to the economy of the place where they live. And this is also up 2 percentage points compared to fall of 2019. A metric that has fallen, though, and one that is very likely induced by the pandemic, is that fewer Americans now agree that they enjoy interacting with visitors to their community. Currently, 43.6% agree that they enjoy interacting with visitors, and this is down from 2019. On a more positive note, though, and silver lining to COVID, we do see that 44% of Americans feel that the pandemic has in fact highlighted the importance of tourism to their local community. But residents also see some challenges with tourism. In fact, 27.7% agree that the place where they live has issues with over-tourism, and this is something that's grown dramatically, almost 10 percentage points compared to 2 years ago. For those who do feel that they live in a place with over-tourism, we asked how serious the issue is, and 39.8% feel that the issue of over-tourism is either a serious or extremely serious problem in their local community. And then we took it a step further. We asked what is contributing to over-tourism. And while the top factor believed to contribute to over-tourism in one's community is having too many visitors during a specific time of the year, over 1 in 5 also cite a local growing population. So something for destinations and DMOs to consider. Secondary to that, there's also the belief that hotel development is contributing to over-tourism, as well as higher prices caused by tourism. And so will over-tourism deter travelers? Unfortunately, we do see, yes, it will. 53.7% of American travelers agree that if a US destination has a problem with over-tourism, they'll be less likely to visit that destination. And agreement with this statement has grown since 2019. And we see the growing effect of negative sentiment towards over-tourism in actual travel behaviors. When asked if they personally visited a US destination they felt had issues with over-tourism, 27.2% of American travelers said yes, but this is down from 31% in 2019. The pandemic, of course, has affected this, but it'll be interesting to see if this behavioral shift will continue on in our post-pandemic travel world. As we all know, word of mouth and recommendations from friends and family play an integral role in how travelers choose the destinations they want to visit. I know I rely very heavily on friends and family and their recommendations, but this is a double-edged sword. Travelers also share negative stories about the destinations that they visit. And we see here that 60.4% of Americans say that they have told friends and family about destinations having over-tourism problems. And of this group, they specifically recommended that their friends or family not visit that destination. So again, we know that word of mouth is significant when it comes to travel inspiration and travel planning. So another thing that's worth considering. Over a third of American travelers report that their community has an official destination marketing organization, while 28.5% are unsure. They don't know whether the community where they live has an official DMO. But amongst those who do say that they have a local DMO, we see that 42.7% are familiar with the DMO's work. And the work of official DMOs is highly rated. 70% of American travelers reported that the work of their local DMO is either good or very good. We asked American travelers how likely they are to use official destination marketing organization resources as a result of the pandemic. And while 30.6% of Americans say that they are more likely to use a DMO's resources for travel planning due to the pandemic, there is 1 in 4 who say that they won't. They disagree with this statement. So there's work there that can be done to encourage travelers to use official DMO marketing assets. Asked whether they've used the official website of a destination's local visitors or convention bureau or a destination state or national government travel office to help plan travel in the past year. We see that this has fluctuated since the onset of the pandemic. It's gone up and down. Currently, we see 1 in 5 saying that they've used an official DMO website in the past year to plan travel. When it comes to using an official visitor information center while traveling for leisure in the past 12 months, usage is actually similar to pre-pandemic levels. Right now, we see 29.3% of American travelers most recently saying that they've used a visitor information center in the past year, so about the same as pre-pandemic times. So in summary, optimism taking more leisure trips in the next year has exceeded pre-pandemic levels. American travelers, particularly younger generations, are growing more concerned about climate change and the environmental impact of travel. Perceptions of over-tourism are likely to affect future travel to a destination. And there's opportunity to boost awareness of official destination marketing organizations within local communities. And with that, I'd love to open it up to any comments or questions, Q&A, and I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
Thanks a lot, Kim. Yeah, we had a couple of quick questions just before we get on to the next session. So we had a question asking if, do we typically see seasonal variations in travel intent, i.e. stronger in summer and weaker in the winter months?
Yeah, great question. Definitely over the course of the pandemic, we have seen that. There has definitely been seasonal changes over the past 20 months as far as how travelers are feeling about, as far as sentiment and how travelers are feeling. Pre-pandemic, there has been some shifts in sentiment, though not dramatic, not as dramatic as what we've seen during this COVID time.
Very good. Okay, Kim, so if you stand by to rejoin us perhaps at the end if there's additional questions. And for now, we'll jump into the other two parts of our destination management edition. First, I just wanted to highlight this two-part white paper series we're launching tomorrow. There's a blog up today, 26 for COP26, and kudos to Sina for coming up with that name. So this is 26 practical actions for destinations and their tourism industry partners to address climate change, but also tackle some of these broader destination management issues. So just three really quick examples of the many, many examples we've got on this white paper series. Booking.com yesterday just launched a new commitment to sustainability. They've got this new sustainability badge system where they're aggregating all the various sustainability programs and commitments from various hotels and accommodation providers, and we'll be surfacing and highlighting that. It's a great example of sustainable marketing and how you can work with your industry, both to surface their sustainability commitments on your own channels, but also on major platforms like Booking.com. Secondly, a practical example from another section of 26 for COP26, public transport, increasing the use of public transport. And so an increasing number of North American cities, and it's pretty much standard in Europe, have a public transport option, a train or light rail from the airport to city centre. Geneva, as an example, has when you get off the plane, a ticket machine that generates a free ticket to use the rail, the light rail, or the bus to get into town for free. So it's a very simple way that people can interact with public transport and actually start building familiarity with it so they can hopefully use it throughout their stay. And a third quick example, and we actually highlighted this in our Funding Futures work, a short-term rental tax was introduced in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Apologies for the typo there. And they basically built out a wastewater system, but a final part of that was treatment of the wastewater in a restored and expanded wetlands project, which had very significant impacts in terms of their climate footprint in terms of CO2 emissions. And so that's a great example of what's called Natural Climate Solutions. There's a major report that has come out in the last couple of months about how this can be a very significant part of dealing with climate change. And of course, all of these things, whether it's protecting or restoring wetlands, forests, etc., are a great way of also enhancing the natural environment that both locals and visitors can use. So just three quick examples of a whole range of case studies and resources from around the world. We'll be publishing that tomorrow. That link will be going out in the email that we'll be sharing after this webinar. Right, without further ado, and I just did want to highlight Funding Futures. So hopefully everybody's aware of the enormous amount of work that we put in with partners, both in North America and Europe. So a call out to Civitas, Tourism Economics and Destination Analysts for working on an updated 2021 edition of Funding Futures. So that's looking at a huge range of funding options and opportunities, including funding for destination management and sustainability initiatives. And we've aggregated a whole range of examples from around the world of how money's being used in smart ways. So I want to pass over now to Sina. We reached out to Group Now and Global Destination Sustainability Movement when we heard of a project that they had started working on, which is understanding how DMOs can engage more effectively with their local residents and building a global study of best practices in this space. And Sina's going to give you an overview of the European study, and then we're going to be announcing some details of the study that we'll be launching in North America and in the South Pacific that will run in parallel. So Sina, over to you to give us an update on democracy.
Thank you very much, Chris, and hi everyone. Good evening, I guess it is here from Copenhagen. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm excited to tell you about the Democracy Project, which we've only just launched here in Europe, and we're excited to be working with Chris and team around what we could call the global version. So let me just start sharing a little bit. So I'll show you a bit sort of why this project, what motivated and where we are at today. What are the plans for this project? It was launched just, I guess, a week and a half ago, and will be rolled out in the coming many months until early fall or late summer 2022. Time for democracy. Now, the idea for the project actually kind of originated to some of the discussions we've even had a lot of pre-pandemic. Now we've saw from Kimberly as well some of the results around over tourism, which was and still is a big discussion here in Europe. And also a big discussion in terms of what is then the role of the DMO in relation to these sort of this rise in negative feelings towards tourism and a negative perception of tourism to local communities. And so, of course, part of that discussion has been what is then the social license to operate for tourism organizations, for DMOs? How do you seek as a minimum level the acceptance and tolerance of tourism, but even better the approval and support, and then further to co-ownership around the tourism agenda and how we develop tourism to local communities, because in the end, as people who work within tourism, we are marketing places where people live. So that co-ownership to welcoming and inviting tourism to our communities is essential. And then, of course, we've also seen examples pre-COVID in Europe of local communities that have reached that point of rejection and opposition, where you have no social license to operate, and where you have public demonstrations against tourism and so on. And then throughout the pandemic, what we've seen is that a lot of not just destinations, not just for tourism, but a lot of cities, a lot of places where people live, a lot of communities have actually taken that opportunity of, in the absence of tourism, of having a new conversation of how do we want this to look like when tourism returns, or just when the pandemic is over. So Participate Melbourne, Have Your Say in London's Future. These are both on city levels, but we've also seen campaigns specifically for tourism. For example, a big campaign in France by Atout France, the national tourism organization in France, a campaign that reached out to all French residents to respond to this question, like how should we build, or how do we develop a more responsible tourism to France, asking for ideas, for suggestions from local French, but also a parallel campaign actually targeting the rest of the world. What can you do? How can you be part of making tourism more responsible to France? So engaging in this new conversation around how do we want the future to look like has really been something we've seen happening quite a lot throughout the pandemic. And then, of course, we've also seen that in the absence of tourism, in some places, local communities have also reflected on what they've missed, but also what they haven't missed. And in Key West, for for example, I think we've heard also a lot about these discussions around cruise ships and whether or not local communities were, you could say, hesitant to welcome back the same tourism as before. Now, in Europe, we've also seen these examples of sort of more long-term, more strategic efforts to really re-engage with local communities around the future of tourism. So this is an example from one of the partners in the newly launched Democracy project, the metropolitan region of Bordeaux, where they have developed, or they are developing, a new tourism strategy with sustainability at the very core. And as part of that, they've actually launched this agora for tourism discussion, where they're openly sharing all the results of their research, tourism sentiment research included, but also inviting people to have their say, to engage in the discussion. And this is not a one-off. This is not something that's just happening for the strategy. This is something that they are intending to continue to do. And so these are all examples of some of the things and some of the initiatives that kind of got us started on the idea for democracy. In the same way, the Amsterdam and partners came out with this redesigning the visitor economy of Amsterdam in, I guess it was almost a year ago, in December 2020, with this new vision 2025 for how they want to develop the visitor economy of Amsterdam. And the real focus here is very much on local community and how they re-engage with local community, how it is the community that sort of defines the place and defines the value of place, and how they are inviting tourism that is value adding to that and that shares the values of that place, but also how, for example, they are looking to organize local communities to sort of, they're developing this idea of community funds, where part of the tourism tax revenue will be directed to these community funds, who then allocate or who then decide how they should be reinvested into local communities and local businesses. So there's a lot of focus on how do we empower, how do we engage, and how do we empower local communities to take part in how tourism should develop in our city. And then, of course, in our project, we also have Barcelona, and Barcelona has been challenged for many years with issues of over-tourism and negative local perception of tourism. And they've worked quite seriously with this for many, many years, including doing resident sentiment surveys, doing a lot of very serious research, and also the launch of the Barcelona City Tourism Council, which has been in existence since 2016, which is really a conversation around the future of tourism in the city, with representatives of lots of different bodies, academic, but also from local community, from the industry, and so on and so on. And so here they are discussing what should be the priorities, what are the recommendations to the city government. They also have mandate to make recommendations on how to allocate 50% of tourism tax revenue, and so on. And they're also looking at how do we keep this council relevant, and how do we empower it even more in our future development. So they are also part of this project, and in the discussions around what is really the model for future democracies, you could say. So these are sort of the initial curious questions that we've asked with this project, and that we are engaging with DMOs and partners to seek out questions for. I think there were some really interesting results from the research that Kimberly was sharing. I also saw one of the questions was around this, how many actually know that you have a DMO in your local community, in the place where you live. And there's also a question, of course, is what is the level of trust from local populations to DMOs? As DMOs feel an increasing pressure to engage with local population, to have that conversation around tourism, but what is really the mutual trust between the two? How is community participation and engagement motivated? We see a lot of, from the sentiment surveys that have been done in Europe, we do see that sort of hesitancy or not even real interest in engaging in conversations around tourism as a local. So how do you actually motivate continuous dialogue around this? What are the existing democratic and participatory practices, not necessarily within tourism, but that we could find inspiration from in how we define and how we model the future governance of tourism? What goes in and what comes out? We talk a lot about getting input from local residents, but actually what is the output and outcome of the input that we get? How do DMOs actually use this input from, for example, a sentiment survey to make change? So we're looking at this broad spectrum of public participation and how, as a DMO, you can sort of engage across these. So we're looking at best practices, we're looking at models and frameworks, we're looking to test these in learning labs as well, both on sort of the basic, you could say, levels of public participation, of local resident engagement, all the way up to actual empowerment. What does it change? What is the output and outcome of how you do it? And so, yeah, that's what we've launched with Time for Democracy. We have 3 overall objectives. We want to map out, understand citizen participation and involvement in tourism, frameworks of democratic participation and governance, not just within tourism, but that can inspire how we develop, how we govern future tourism, and based on that, develop new models for future democracies, as we call it. These are the overall project tracks. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but both Chris and I are available for further questions, of course. Mapping out current practices, looking into frameworks of participation. We'll also be working with maybe a couple, but at least some universities around this, some of the deliberative democracy experts that we have in our network. And we'll be looking at digital platforms and tools that are being developed more and more coming up, not just for conversations around tourism, but also how do we integrate tourism into some of those platforms that are in existence. Methods of activation, we want to do learning labs as well as part of this project. And then, of course, we'll be talking a lot about what comes out of it, because as a democracy project, it's also going to be very communicative and quite open. These are the partners that we have in the European project for now. It's still developing, but this is the good partner circle of 18 destination partners. And all of them are in many ways leaders, have done a lot, are doing a lot as well. So this is also really sharing what works and what doesn't work. And these are our initiating partners here for the Democracy Europe, Global Destination Sustainability Movement, the Travel Foundation, TCI Research, and European Cities Marketing. And then, of course, we are very excited to also be launching Democracy in North America and Oceania with Miles Partnership, which Chris will be telling you more about. So I hope I stayed within my minutes here, Chris.
That was great. Thanks, Sina. Yeah, just a quick introduction to the North American and Oceania edition. So Oceania, of course, Australia, New Zealand, and the South Pacific Islands. North America, that's Canada, the US, Mexico, and the Caribbean. And what we've done is worked with our European partners on launching a parallel project, which will both tap into the insights from Europe, but also will be customized to some of the unique challenges and issues that are of particular concern here in North America. So the core parts will include all of the elements you've seen in terms of the European edition, but we are, for example, going to also tap in, you can see on number 4, into industry and how DMOs engage with their industry partners to make sure that. Plus, we want to get some understanding of how residents see tourism as a career and as job opportunities. And actually, we've just had a question about this. So that the whole issue of workforce recruitment is not the primary focus of this, but of course, how residents and how the community see tourism directly affects the ability of businesses to recruit workers. So we'll be also tapping into that sort of understanding, along with, you can see number 5, the whole very pertinent issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how DMOs are engaging in particular with minority communities and communities that perhaps in the past haven't been a core part of the discussion around tourism. Sina mentioned digital tools and platforms, so we're going to be doing a global review of the best collaborative and ideation platforms for seeking input from both residents and industry, and how they can be used to continue the conversation. So there's going to be obviously a distillation of the sort of best practices that comes out of this. We're actually going to have a sort of public version at a high level for everybody in the industry to hopefully gain value from, but the participants, of course, are going to be getting much more in-depth insights and the opportunity to both engage and collaborate with their peers, both in North America and or in the South Pacific, as well as reaching out to communities in Europe as part of this process. So there's going to be a limited number of DMOs, both in North America and the South Pacific, around 20 or so here in North America, 10 to perhaps 20 in Oceania. We are looking at opportunities within that larger group, that there'll be smaller groups that can collaborate on particular issues. So, for example, the major cities coming together, perhaps small to medium cities. If we have a collaborative group of mountain communities, lots of issues, for example, in mountain communities around short-term rentals and so on, as well as beach communities, in fact. You can see the timeline there. There is going to be a small cost for participation, and we've got a website set up that you can indicate your interest. So please go there, and we'll be back in touch with the prospectus to answer any questions and to see if you might be interested. So now we've got the opportunity for Q&A. We'll come back to some of the democracy questions, but Kim, we had a question about, just repeating, I think I answered it live in the chat or in the Q&A, but this issue of awareness of DMOs. I think the numbers you quoted were 36% of people were aware they had a DMO, 34% didn't know they had a DMO, and about a quarter weren't sure. Is that right?
So 36.2% are aware, 28.5% don't know. So almost 30% are unsure, and 35% said no. So yeah, I think there's definitely an awareness issue and an opportunity to boost awareness and educate.
Yeah, I know we've asked that question historically, but it seems to me that if anything, it's got worse. It might be interesting to dig up some of those old numbers, but it's been a recurring problem. The overall issue with DMOs is not that people have any sort of negative impression or have concerns. They just simply don't know that DMOs exist.
Exactly. Yeah, they just simply have no idea or unaware. So yeah, I think we have asked this question historically, so we'll take a look at that and see how that's trended over time.
Yeah, so obviously a fundamental issue when you're engaging with local residents. If they don't know you exist, that's the starting point. Sina, this question about the issue of workforce. So we had a question about, the biggest issue our industry in particular faces is just trying to get workers. Is that, I know it's an issue in Europe as well. Has that come up in your discussions with your European partners about how workforce issues might be part of this process?
To be honest, I mean, because we've only just launched a project, so it hasn't come up as a concrete issue in relation to democracy, but it's a big discussion, and so I would be surprised if it didn't. Also, because I agree with what you said, there's a very close relation to how we people in general see tourism as an environment, as an industry to work with, and how we perceive tourism as a contribution, as a factor in our societies and communities. So I think there is a close relation to that. So yeah, I think that would be an interesting aspect of it. As you said, probably not a core focus, but nonetheless an interesting focus to have as part of the project. Yeah, exactly. We had the European Cities conference in the spring. We also had Young Professionals Network from Melbourne, Australia there, and they'd done research among their members on sort of the perception and whether or not they would also recommend their friends to work within tourism, and the perception of tourism as an industry of purpose and sustainability. And they were really seeing some of the issues around sort of the general perception of tourism as an industry and as a non-contributor to the sustainability agenda, as some of the core issues around attracting new talent and attracting the younger workforce, which I think is interesting. And I also kind of taps into some of the data you were sharing, Kimberly, around especially the younger travelers and their awareness and focus on issues around sustainability.
Yeah, and that's something, since we've been tracking that too, that's something we've seen since we started tracking that, as younger generations tend to be much more concerned about the environment and climate change.
Yeah, I know this issue's been looked at in depth in New Zealand, and they launched a major program called Go With Tourism, which was designed to tackle some of these perceptions. But I know the research that was done around that highlighted that there was a significant problem, not only with younger people, but in fact their parents, that the parents, in terms of offering advice to their kids, had negative perceptions about tourism as a career prospect or area. It was seen as not offering the sort of quality of life opportunities that other careers had. And so it's closely tied in with some of these other issues. Mm-hmm. Just a note about, so we're going to be doing obviously a European edition, a North American edition, and an Oceania edition. I see my very good friend Jens Theerhart has joined us from the Mekong in Vietnam in Southeast Asia. And so Jens, we have talked about with our Forensic group now, you know, are there opportunities in other parts of the world, whether it's Asia or Africa, etc. So we can certainly follow up on that as well. Quick question here before I wrap things up. Emily, hello Emily, asked, how do you see DMOs working with economic development agencies to tackle responsible destination growth? She notes recently we've seen negative sentiment towards tourists and towards new residents, but obviously it's just one part of a broader sort of economic development story and a growth, you know, in terms of new people coming in or people coming in on a semi-permanent basis to work remotely. And so my quick comment, and then I'll ask for your guys' comment. I've just been up in Grand County, Winter Park in Colorado. They, like many other mountain communities, are really dealing with exactly this issue. Tourism is only one part of a much broader range of issues. With remote work, digital nomads, and the sort of ability for people to work from anywhere, we're seeing real pressures on housing affordability, housing for workers of all types, and therefore sort of tourism is part of a broader discussion that absolutely, I think, whatever the issues that come up in this democracy project in terms of solutions, it's got to be a community-wide response. Tourism cannot tackle many of these issues by itself. Sina, what would you add?
Yeah, I agree with that. Tourism cannot tackle, and tourism is also often not the sole issue at hand. And so I think democracy is also about taking an integrated look at it. We won't be able to engage people necessarily in discussions only of tourism. So it is discussions around the communities that we want to live in, the cities we want to live in, and how can tourism be part of or contributing to that as a positive force. So I think those, you know, it's also turning around the discussion. But I think the question Emily is asking is also, it's interesting because we do see that convergence more and more from what we may have defined very sort of, these are the tourists and these are the locals. And I think it's converging much more with what you're also saying, digital nomads. We can work from anywhere. We can even, you know, stay longer, 3 months at a time in one place. And that kind of almost makes you at least a temporary local. And so you'll also have different habits. You'll have a different behavior than you would if you were just a visitor for a couple of days, but you are still a visitor and you probably still have a little bit of that mentality with you. So I think we're just seeing a convergence of behaviors that is so interesting, and that will have both potentials, but also some new challenges to destinations. Yes.
Kim, what would you add? And in particular, I know you've researched the whole sort of remote working phenomenon. What insights can you offer?
Well, the one thing that I want to say is that in addition to there being an opportunity to raise levels of awareness of local DMOs, I think that the question that Emily posed as far as DMOs working with local economic development agencies, that's definitely an opportunity. I'm basing this on perceptions and anecdotes, not on hard data, but my sense is that there probably isn't enough collaboration between the two, DMOs and economic development agencies. And I think there is an opportunity for them to band together and start working together as far as managing destination, managing local resident perceptions and expectations, as well as travelers and visitors, tourists. We have studied digital nomads and people visiting, especially over the course of the pandemic. We've had webinars in which we've had leaders of various DMOs in which the destinations are ones that are highly visited, highly touristed. And it really is a balance as far as communicating to tourists the importance of keeping a destination, respecting a destination's natural assets. And we also hear stories from clients of ours who say that people will come, they'll visit, they'll probably end up leaving their waste where they shouldn't. So I think it really is an education and awareness issue.
Very good. And that whole topic of sustainable marketing and comms is a key part of that 26th COP26 with lots of suggestions there. Thanks so much, Sina, and thanks so much, Kim. So let's just wrap it up in terms of the resources from today are going to be available both on this website, both Miles websites and Destination Analyst website. Plus, we'll be sending a link out in the email tomorrow to all the slides, and you can check in at any point with the interactive dashboard of the latest research. We've also, of course, got our knowledge portal around COVID-19, which includes a whole range of other resources and insights, including bi-weekly research on how Americans are thinking about COVID and the recovery. And then that 26th for COP26, we've published the blog today. The first part of our two-part white paper is coming out tomorrow. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we look forward to connecting with you at a future event, hopefully in person. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris.
So much, Chris. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.